Welcome back to EASD TV. Now, one of the projects that has been attracting a lot of interest is the IMI EU-funded Hypo-RESOLVE project. Now, it involves patient groups, it involves academia, and it involves industry. And as the name suggests, it's about hypoglycemia. To introduce it for us, let me start with Bastiaan de Galan, who is, we established, the daddy of this project. Bastiaan, just tell us a bit more about it before I introduce our other guests.
So as you say, this was an EU-funded project. It had the specific aim to increase the understanding of hypoglycemia among people with diabetes using a multidisciplinary, multi-level, high-level approach. And so we had different work packages in the project looking at the problem of hypoglycemia from a preclinical perspective. We constructed a large clinical database with data from almost 100 clinical studies among people with diabetes. We looked at psychological aspects of hypoglycemia. We looked at sensor-detected hypoglycemia because many people now use sensors. And we looked at health economic aspects. And we wanted to use these data to refine or provide more support for the classification of hypoglycemia as we had adopted that classification a couple of years ago.
Okay, now let's introduce the people who've been involved in this. So, Pratik Choudhary from the University of Leicester, you've been involved in an embedded project, which you're going to tell us a bit more about. Jill Carlton from the University of Sheffield, quality of life was the element you tackled. Simon Heller, also from the University of Sheffield, you tackled the cardiovascular outcomes. And a particular welcome to Brian Frier from the University of Edinburgh, and you are the person who has been the independent person from EASD. So welcome to you all. Let me start with Pratik. Pratik, you did an embedded study. Tell me what that involved and what the outcomes were.
So the study we did was called Hypometrics, and the idea was that we recognized from our clinical practice that many people would have low sensor glucose readings that they did not feel. And we wanted to know what the impact of those events were. Were they clinically relevant? What their important was how they affected people living with diabetes. So we had about 600 people across 5 countries who wore sensors and reported every single hypo they had. And we were able to, and gave us information about how they felt every day. And we were able to understand the fact that actually if you didn't recognize that hypo, if it went low, there was no measurable effect on their quality of life.
So were these people who had lost their sense of awareness?
Well, actually no. So people with all other measures, these people had what we would recognize as good awareness of hypoglycemia, but still they only recognized about 50% of those low sensor events. And of course, when we, without diabetes, wear sensors, we also see events between 3 and 3.9 millimoles per liter. So I think we're seeing low readings that are not quite low enough for the brain to recognize that you're low. And I think it just reduces the worry that we have about those events. I think the events that go lower, below 3, we're much more worried about. And of course, Bastiaan did some work looking at that within this project.
Jill, the really important thing here, of course, is the quality of life for patients, or rather I should call them people living with diabetes. What were you finding?
So as part of the work that we were involved in, we developed a new patient-reported outcome measure, so a PRO, that can be used in a standardised way to try and put a number to the impact that hypos have upon a person's quality of life. And in order to be able to do that, we spoke to lots of people who do experience hypoglycemia to find out all the different ways in which it impacts upon them. And we used that information to help develop some draft questions, which we tested out before we finalise the instrument following a large survey. So we've worked very closely with people with lived experience throughout the whole project.
So what's your bit in this?
So I was involved in one of the projects whereby we had suggested that the classification of hypoglycemia should change some years ago. And the reason we said that there was nothing apart from very severe hypoglycemia, which is relatively unusual, thankfully, which suggested or tested whether a glucose level which was low but not enough to make you unconscious could have other effects, particularly around cardiovascular events such as heart attacks or even mortality. We had introduced the classification, but we hadn't really tested it with large amounts of information. And so an important part of this project was to get all the large insulin manufacturers, 3 large insulin manufacturers, to give us data from all their trials over the last few years, combine them, and then analyze in many thousands of people with hypoglycemia, which has never been done, whether the classification that we had, and in particular the adverse effect of cardiovascular disease and cardiac mortality, did in fact get it affected at a glucose of around 3, in between 4, of course, where it starts, and very severe low glucose.
And just going back to you, Bastiaan, there is an extraordinary thing just in what Simon has said, because the idea that you can get data from all these manufacturers is in itself an extraordinary thing to happen.
Yes, absolutely. And that was something that we were, I mean, as a clinician, I thought that this should be relatively easy, but from a pharmaceutical industry perspective, this was really, really hard, because these are all different industry partners coming together, sitting at the same table together for the first time, and allowing each other to sort of looking into their kitchen. And that was something that they were not very used to. So I think it was a good accomplishment, not just from me, but I think from the partner in Switzerland to get that job done.
Now let's turn to Brian Frier, because you, for the EASD, you have this independent kind of bird's eye view. Give us your thoughts about this study.
Well, as you say, I've had nothing to do with this study. I'm completely impartial. But I've been involved with hypoglycemia research for a long time, about 45 years to be fair. This is a very ambitious and a large, quite complex study, which is very well funded. And what we've saw today is only a very small part of it. But it's impressive, and it's taken a lot of organization and a lot of skill and leadership to get it together. Now, what I can't say at the moment is how effective it will be in terms of clinical outcomes. We hope that it will change patient care and give us more information which will be beneficial for clinical management, but we're not quite at that stage yet. But the projects that have been presented today are important and I think very useful. So this is very encouraging.
So what next, Bastiaan?
So I think there are a couple of things. Actually, we do need to finish up some analysis that we haven't yet finished. So that is coming, and certainly a bunch of papers that are in the future that we will publish. We don't have the resources now to continue, but we know each other and we have this consortium, and I'm very confident that we're able to keep in touch and to at least continue some of the research, and hopefully find some additional funding to continue. And as Brian says, that the job hasn't finished yet, but we hope to get there in the end.
And I'm going to go from on one of my hobby horses, from my very extensive stable of hobby horses. But Jill, I'm going to come to you, because we don't often find patient groups involved directly in research, but increasingly patient groups are coming into research, and that's a really important aspect of these big studies that we need to encourage and continue.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think we could have done anything in Hypo-RESOLVE if it wasn't for the support of those people. And we've been very fortunate to be supported by our Patient Advisory Committee, the PAC, throughout the whole process. And I think we need to really sort of differentiate between a number of different terminology with respect to that. So it's important that we view the PAC as partners in the work that we've done, rather than us just presenting ideas to them and saying, this is what we're going to do moving forward, is their voice is very powerful in the direction of our research, as it should be, because at the heart of everything that we do in all the studies that we've talked about as part of Hypo-RESOLVE, it's ultimately to allow that patient voice to be heard and to improve outcomes.
And going back to your point, Brian, about outcomes and getting them implemented, patients have extraordinary pull in being able to pull through. We always, as clinicians and researchers, trying to push stuff through, but patient pull is becoming more and more important to not only for policymakers but also to regulators too. So congratulations, everybody. It sounds top. Thank you all for coming along. Really appreciate it. Well, there's yet more to come on EASD TV. Who would have thought? There's much, much more. I look forward to talking to you again. Bye for now.